All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start chapter 3 here with this PowerPoint. Chapter 3 is an introduction to measuring crime and crime patterns. It is very important, especially when it comes to criminal justice, about how we interpret crime based on statistics, how we acquire these statistics, and how we use these statistics in order to generate valuable information on how to deal with crime, the ways that crime is trending, this, that, and the next. So, as always, learning objectives. Learning objectives are very important because this is what I want you to learn, and how do I find out if you learned it? I test you on it. So, when it comes to making your study guides, once again, I would start with these concepts. They're going to be covered majority throughout this PowerPoint, and if not, they will be covered in your text. Like I've said before, you are responsible for all the information in the chapter, even if we don't cover it in the PowerPoint. I'm going to highlight the very important things and the things that I want to emphasize. However, all of this information is in the text. That's why it's important for you to get your textbooks and read, to be completely honest with you. So there are 4 learning objectives on this slide and 3 more on this slide. Please be sure to look at them, okay? So first things first, measuring the extent of crime, okay? So an accurate awareness about the extent of crime serves several purposes, including explaining crime and demographic trends, like I've already mentioned, understanding cultures and subcultures, why some people commit crimes and why some don't, measuring quality of life. The amount of crime in a neighborhood is the #1 correlate to how people interpret their quality of life. Okay, how well they're living, how well their neighborhood is living, the #1 correlate is the amount of crime. Promoting evidence-based prevention strategies. You will see that no matter what you do in criminal justice now, everything pretty much has to be evidence-based. There's nobody pulling stuff out of a hat and trying out a certain policy just because they feel like it. Everything is evidence-based now, and as well as developing evidence-based policies. So if what we have evidence-based right now isn't working or is not working well enough, we need to be able to have statistics based on crime trends, based on information from offenders and victims, this, that, and the next, to develop evidence-based policies. Okay, the key word here, though, is accurate. Okay, there are very many ways and different ways to measure crime, as well as different ways to interpret and publish crime statistics. Okay, you can have one crime database, and based on the verbiage we use in a report, we can say that crime went up or crime went down, essentially, because of the way that we phrase it. Okay. Many times, one crime database can serve as a template to argue many different points about crime that contradict each other. Okay. On the next slide, we're going to discuss some of the different methods for collecting crime statistics. All right. So we're moving on. So some different strategies used to measure the amount of crime. Data is useful in developing specific crime prevention and intervention strategies. Like I said a couple slides before, these are what we call evidence-based practices, okay? They are based on evidence. The evidence is the statistics in and of themselves, okay? So the SARA method, if you haven't ever heard of it before, it is simply an acronym that stands for scan, analyze, respond, and assess. Okay, so when we scan, we find the problem or issue that you want to deal with. This is where we identify what is the issue that we want to fix. Okay, we analyze it. We bring together a working group and analyze what's going on, develop a response to the problem. The R is implementing said response. Okay, when you implement said response, you go through, you do some sort of trial, this, that, and the next, and you implement a crime reduction strategy, for example, to try and help with the issue that you have identified. Okay. The second A is assess, okay? So through statistical analysis and data of some sort, okay, we assess whether or not the intervention works, okay? Just a side note, if you plan on getting into any sort of academic research in the future, if you want to go on to grad school like I have, this, that, and the next, I live by the SARA method, okay? It works not only with police, but with courts and corrections. Essentially, any sociological problem that we have, in one way or another, we are implementing the SARA method, okay? So there are 3 main strategies that we have in the United States and 3 main, essentially, databases that we have in the United States that we use for crime data, okay? We have uniform crime reports, we have the National Crime Victimization Survey, and we have the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Okay, they all have their own acronyms, and they're all employed by different people. Okay, it is important to note that these are all properly developed crime prevention and intervention strategies, and that they are all very valid. It just depends on how we want to use them. Okay, we're going to get more into this in the next couple of slides, but just because one might work for you doesn't mean that the other two are invalid by any means. They might just be invaluable to what you're trying to do. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So uniform crime reports, they were created way back in 1930. Okay, way back in 1930. Funny enough, so the IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, demanded a program such as the UCR to be established because they felt that media were inaccurately depicting crime statistics and newspapers. This is obviously way before, news television was popular, at least, but they were depicting crime as way worse than it was in newspapers, and they were glorifying criminals and this, that, and that. So they developed the UCR, and by they I mean the FBI. Okay, the FBI developed the UCR. It collects data about crimes reported to the police. Obviously, that is italicized and highlighted in red for a reason. Okay, we collect data from more than 18,000 police departments across the United States. Okay, they report their information. It goes into this big database. If we don't know about the crime, aka we as in the police department doesn't know about the crime, we cannot report it. Okay, you're going to find out that this is one of the major things that is a drawback about the UCR, is that it only collects data on crimes reported to the police. Okay, so, and the findings are published each year. It's called the Crime in the United States report. The link is right there. If you simply Google crime in the United States, it will take you to the FBI.gov website, and you can look at all the reports going back, I don't know how many years, but there are multiple if you're curious to see how it works. Some other side notes. August Vollmer is a very famous Berkeley, California police chief. He's kind of viewed as the father of modern policing, especially in America. One of his famous quotes is, "Before energy is expended to improve police procedure, it will first be necessary to collect reliable statistical data." Okay, so in essence, in order to properly develop our evidence-based practices and our strategies that I just talked about, developing the SARA method, this, that, and the next, we have to have accurate information, aka accurate statistics and data, in order to develop those programs and those policies. Okay. Another side note is that J. Edgar Hoover, obviously the Hoover Building in DC is J. Edgar Hoover is who it was named after. He's kind of the father of the FBI, if you want to think of it that way. He took over the FBI in 1924. This was kind of his first big project when he was employed by the FBI and running the FBI. All right. So some other things about the UCR. So the UCR categorizes Part 1 and Part 2 offenses. Okay, so they kind of separate them based on seriousness. So you'll see that criminal homicide, forcible rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson, which was added in 1979. Okay, these are all Part 1 offenses. This is viewed by the UCR and the FBI as the more serious offenses. Okay, Part 2 offenses are essentially not as serious. Obviously, they kind of all have their merit, but page 63 in your text outlines the Part 2 offenses that aren't as serious if you want to see all of the different offenses that the UCR takes data on. Okay, so it's also important to realize how they define these crimes. So we're just going to talk about Part 1 offenses for right now. But one of the main things to get across in this chapter is the definition of crimes and the way data is taken is important to know when it comes to analyzing information. Okay. When it comes to criminal homicide, so this combines murder and non-negligent homicide. Okay. Deaths caused by negligence, attempts to kill, assaults to kill, suicides, and accidental deaths are excluded. Okay. Forcible rape, for example, any penetration without consent of the victim. Okay. Yes, this is vaginal, oral, anal, any penetration without consent of the victim is forcible rape. Okay, it is a Part 1 offense. Robbery, the taking or attempting to take anything of value from the care, custody, or control of a person or persons by force or threat of violence. Okay, aggravated assault and unlawful attack on someone, basically meaning not in self-defense for the purpose of inflicting severe or aggravated bodily injury. Okay, burglary, the unlawful entry of a structure to commit a felony or theft. Okay, larceny theft is taking from the possession of another without force. Okay, so the way that we define these crimes are very important. Okay, so let's talk about robbery, burglary, and larceny theft, for example. Okay, robbery is separated because of the threat of violence or injury to the individual. Okay, one of the main things that has to happen here is said individual, aka the victim, has to be present. So when you see these movies and you see these TV shows and somebody gets home and something's missing, they start screaming, I've been robbed, I've been robbed. They're wrong. They have not been robbed. They have been burglarized, yes, possibly, if it's proven. But they have not been robbed. Okay? The difference between robbery and larceny theft is the simple fact that they have threatened force or violence on them. 99% of the time, that is via a weapon or the threat of a weapon. Okay? But larceny theft kind of is like pickpocketing, for example. If I just walk by and I pickpocket you, and you had no idea that I did it, and then you realize it later on, I never threatened you or whatever else. However, I did steal from you, essentially. That's larceny theft. It's very important to understand how these crimes are defined, is what I'm trying to get across to you guys. Okay? So motor vehicle theft, by the way, it's pretty self-explanatory here. However, once again, it is very important to know how these are defined. With these UCR Part 1 offenses, motor vehicle theft and attempted motor vehicle theft is still reported to the UCR. Okay? So when it comes to criminal homicide, any attempted murder or what am I trying to say? Accidental deaths or suicides, they are excluded. However, when it comes to motor vehicle theft, if I attempted to steal your car and I didn't, and I got away somehow, and that's been reported, that is going to be reported. So once again, it's very important to know how they are reported and how they are recorded. Okay? So moving on. So for Part 1 offenses, the UCR includes data on all of the following: specific crime rates, frequency of crimes cleared by the police, demographic characteristics of the suspects, and crime trends. Okay, all of this stuff is essentially stuff that can be gathered from the data that is reported by local and state police officers and police departments to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Okay, but these are kind of things that can be garnered from that database, essentially. All right. And the next slide. So one of the things that you're going to see here is the crime clock. Okay, provides information about the clearance rate for Part 1 offenses. Essentially, I'm just going to move on real quick. This is the crime clock. This is where you see a violent crime occurs every 24.6 seconds, a murder every 30.5 minutes, one rape every 3.9 minutes. These are the averages, okay? This is what you mean by the crime clock. This is kind of the general statistics and averages across the United States. Obviously, we can break these down by demographics and this, that, and next, but this is kind of what they're gathering by what the crime clock is, in case anybody was wondering. All right? So let's move on. Very important criticisms of the UCR. Obviously, I've already talked about database does not include crimes that are not reported. Okay, only crimes that are reported to police departments are a part of the UCR. Okay, the UCR also mischaracterizes the crime problem via, okay, one of the main reasons is this third bullet point: law enforcement agencies underreport or overreport crime when completing monthly crime reports. It happens all the time. Okay, is it completely ethical? No. Is it averages rounding up, averages rounding down? Yes. It's just the logistics of the UCR and of crime rates. Okay, when you round up every month for 12 months and then you go report your statistics, rounding up every month for 12 months can completely exacerbate the crime issue that you have in the real world, or compared to what it really is. Okay, and then the smaller bullet point: some agencies define crimes differently. Across state lines, there's different crimes, or pardon me, there's different definitions of crimes. Crimes are broken down between, murder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in some states, and then in Smaller states, it could be just murder 1 and 2, for example. Obviously, that's just a very vague example, but agencies and states define crimes differently all the time. Okay, it's another one of the criticisms of the UCR. All right, so that concludes our discussion on the UCR. Now we're going to move on to the NCVS. Okay, so in response to the UCR's main criticism that it is only crime reported to police departments, we developed the NCVS. All right, the National Crime Victimization Survey. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is on victimization, so it is self-reported, okay, as a victim. This is where we have tried to get to the dark figure of crime, which you see kind of highlighted there in red, and which we'll talk about in a second. But this is how we try to answer that main criticism of the UCR. Okay, so the NCVS, it collects information directly from U.S. residents to assess their victimization experiences. Okay, it was created in 1972 after the Johnson Commission called for the data to increase the understanding on the dark figure of crime. So the dark figure of crime, by and large and plain and simple, is the crime that goes unreported to the police. Okay, it is the crime that goes unreported to the police. That is very important to know, and it's very important to associate that with the NCVS. Okay, the goal of the NCVS is to get at that dark figure of crime. Okay, so like once again, the UCR is great. However, it only accounts for crimes that the police have information on. Okay, if I get robbed and say it was only a couple bucks, or sorry, I can't, okay, I could have gotten robbed or just pickpocketed and say it was only a couple bucks, and I decide, oh, okay, well, I'm late to work, this, that, and the next. I'm not going to report it. That's something that goes unreported. However, if the NCVS came and surveyed me, I'd be able to report it, and that is the dark figure of crime. Okay, obviously there's tons of other examples, but that's just a simple one, just in case you need clarification on what's going on. Okay, it has undergone various changes since it was created. So, for example, it used to be 4 pages, now it's 24. Surveys used to be were stopped. In-person surveys were stopped, and phone interviews were implemented in the 1980s. 1, for lower cost, 2, so that we could reach more people, and because telephones were available at a higher rate. Okay. It is funded by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and data is collected by the United States Census Bureau. So it's not the FBI anymore, but it's funded through the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which kind of goes hand in hand with the Justice Department. And the data is collected by the U.S. Census Bureau, basically, because that's what their specialization is. All right, so let's move on a little bit. So the NCVS findings provide estimates of threatened, completed, and attempted rapes, aggravated assault, simple assaults, burglary, personal theft, burglary theft, property theft, and motor vehicle theft. Okay, these are crimes that would most likely go unreported. All right, so let's just talk about it. Rape is one of the most unreported crimes in the United States because of the toll it takes on a victim. Okay, if they didn't step forward, which hopefully they have the courage to do so, because that's just, you know, it's unfortunate that that has to be that way, and that the criminal justice process has to, you know, involve them in that sort of way. But it's something that we have to go through, right? This is the opportunity through the NCVS for, and I'm going to say women is a stereotypical thing. Obviously, men get raped too, but this is a format, for example, that victims of rape can report their rape. Once again, we're trying to get at that dark figure of crime, okay? And then other small crimes such as petty theft and simple assaults might not reported for many reasons, okay? A lot of people lack confidence in the police. A lot of people lack money for trial. A lot of people lack tangible evidence, okay? Somebody wants to report that they had $2 stolen. I mean, there's $2 bills that have been stolen out of their pocket. It's very hard to prove that came out of my pocket. Those are my $2 bills. Those exact $2 bills were my $2 bills. It's a lack of tangible evidence. And then a lot of times there's warrants on the victim. Okay. If I have warrants and I only had a couple dollars stolen out of my pocket, I'm not calling the cops because they're going to run my database and say I have warrants and they're going to take me to jail. Okay. That's another thing that happens a lot that you don't really realize. Okay. There's this cycle of victimization that happens when people have criminal records and then they're victimized as well. You'll learn about that eventually, but it's just kind of one of the reasons that people don't call the police or don't trust in the police. Okay. So we're going to move on. So I call this NIBRS. It's the National Incident-Based reporting system. Okay, this is also administered by the FBI. It was created in the late 1980s, and it lacks of agency participation. Okay, so it captures information on a broader range of offenses. All right. So it was created in an effort to provide more contextual evidence surrounding each crime. All right. So only 36.1% of the departments who reported their crime statistics to the UCR report to the NIBRs. All right. NIBRs is very detailed. It is very, very, very detailed. So it captures information on a broader range of offenses. It also captures a broader amount of information on said offenses. Right. So we're going to get into what that is in a second. However, this is one of the issues with NIBRs, and this is something that is very important to remember. The main issue with NIBRs is that it is so detailed that it lacks agency participation. People don't want to do it. People don't have the manpower, and people as in police agencies. Sorry, police agencies don't want to do it because they don't want to waste their time. They don't have the manpower to do it just because some small agencies only have a few officers. You're not going to take them off the streets just to take 3 days to fill out a huge, survey for the NIBRs reporting system. It's just not going to happen. Okay. So for example, and just to put a number to it, on top of all of the information that kind of goes into the UCR, the NIBRs collects 57 other data elements regarding the crime. So when you have these jurisdictions that have 100,000 crimes, right, times 57 apiece, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's 5.7 million data elements, right? I think that's right, but I think that kind of gets the point across. All right, so moving on to the next slide. So measuring juvenile delinquency. Okay, so the same methods can be used to assess offending by juveniles. All right, obviously some of the information that is recorded is limited when it comes to juveniles because they have some sort of protections state by state. Obviously the ways that they are reported to the FBI through the UCR and NIBRs, they kind of take away some of the information so that it is not as identifying as it would be with an adult offender. And then we also get the victimization of juveniles through the NCVS. So many methods fall short in capturing many types of delinquent behavior because there are different crimes for delinquents as there are for adults. Okay, those are called status offenses. For example, truancy is not going to school. You can't arrest an adult for doing that because it's not mandatory that an adult goes to school, right? That's an example of capturing many different types of delinquent behavior. So one of the things that is not going to be covered in the UCR is something like truancy. So we're going to move on. We're going to go to crime patterns. All right. So criminologists have demonstrated how crime varies across age, region, race, gender, community, social class, and time. So that's what we're going to cover the rest of this chapter and what I'm going to highlight here. All right. So age and crime. So crime is a young person's game. Okay. The age crime curve. That's what this image is here. Okay. So the bulk of offenses are committed by younger individuals between the ages of 15 and 24. Okay. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but I have my cursor here. So if you look at this huge peak, right, it goes seriously up when we get to the 14 and 15. It goes all the way up here and to the point of 25-ish, 24, 25. That is where the majority of the crimes are occurring in a person's life, all right? So we have age down here. So this is their lifespan and the amount of crime or the percentage of crime that they do or the likelihood that they commit crime. It goes up between 15 and 24, okay? That is the main thing to take away from the age crime curve, okay? So we have certain phrases like they age out of crime, okay? Or the maturation hypothesis, simply people get more mature and they don't have time or the will to commit crimes, okay? Because a lot of crimes that are committed are very petty. They're property crimes. They mature out of that and they realize this is stupid. Why am I risking this? Let me just go work, get a job, this, that, and the next, and I can get away from this. All right. So there are two different identifications, I guess you could say, of criminals, okay, that are related to age and crime. All right. So Adolescent limited. So you're going to see adolescent limited is the big hump here, right? The big hump between, roughly ages 10 to 24, 25, right? You're going to see that same age range when you see all of these figures when it comes to age and crime and the age crime curve, okay? Adolescent limited means that crimes that they commit are limited to their adolescence. Adolescence is from the age of, I think, 12 to 24 or 25-ish, whatever the number is. It very much mirrors the age crime curve, okay? On the other hand, well, real quick, these are the offenders who age out of crime. So like I said on the previous slide, that's a terminology that you're going to hear a lot when it comes to the age crime curve and life course criminology. They age out of crime, okay? The maturation hypothesis. They get too mature and they realize this is stupid. Why am I doing this? Okay? On the other hand, we do have life course persistent offenders, okay? They are ones who will continue to engage in crime throughout their lives, okay? They have a criminal career. They commit crimes past when they are an adolescence and they are well into adulthood. And you'll see that these two people down here at the bottom of this graph, those straight lines that go all the way to 40, 45, that means that they are still committing crimes, still committing crimes, still committing crimes, okay? So let's move on. Region and crime. So I don't know if this is surprising or not, but the South has the highest rates of both violent and property crime. Okay. It's something that has been found very, very many times in very different, like vast amounts of criminological research. Okay. A lot of times they point to the Southern subculture of violence. Okay. It's used to characterize the higher rate of crime found in the South. Essentially what happens, or what is nature down here, is that there's a very masculine and honor-based culture in the South. Okay, if you challenge someone's honor through one way or the next, there's higher likelihood to be an incident in some way or another in the South than there would be in the North. Okay, people are a lot less likely to condone things in the South, especially when it comes to threatening their honor one way or another. Obviously, this has a lot to do with males and testosterone and everything else, more likely than females. However, there is still evidence indicating that even female crime and female victimization is higher in the South. Okay. So, and then side note, the Nisbet and Cohen study on pages 78 and 79, I would pay attention to that. Okay. It's a very interesting study. It's very straightforward. Go look at it. I would recommend it. Okay. So, race, ethnicity, and crime. So UCR shows that blacks and African Americans are overrepresented in each offense type. Obviously, we can get into the many, many, many different ways why they are overrepresented. In some communities, it is because they commit more crime. In some communities, it is because they are over-policed. In a majority of communities, it's because there's systemic racism that basically makes them commit crime because they don't have any other legitimate ways to make money and make a living. Okay, there's tons of different ways. However, all in all, they are overrepresented rather, in each offense type. Okay, disparities suggest that race causes crime and victimization, but not just crime, not just criminal offenses, but victimization as well. Okay, and then, like I said, systemic inequality can be another explanation for offending and the victimization difference between whites and minorities. Okay. Driving While Black was a good study that if you find it interesting, go look into it. One of the other people in the department that does research like this is Dr. Alpert. He does a lot of very good policing research that identify discrepancies within policing specifically. So he is a police-based researcher. But you can go up and look up his resume on the department website if you'd like and see some of the research that he's done. He's a world-renowned researcher. He travels all over the world actually to do research on policing. But yeah, so essentially Driving While Black, the belief that blacks are more likely to be than whites to be stopped by police is the general premise behind it. I would encourage you to go look it up more. It's a pretty interesting topic, especially if you're interested in either racial discrepancies in crime or policing. You'll probably find it very interesting. This is another example that I've included in this PowerPoint. This is kind of separate but equal drug sentencing laws. So I don't know if anybody is aware of the difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine and the sentencing laws that were implemented across the United States back in the 1960s. Essentially, I don't know if you can really garner this, but on the left side of this scale, you have powder cocaine, which powder cocaine back in the 1960s was a lot more expensive, and it was a lot more likelihood of being used by whites. Okay. Very simple. Blacks couldn't afford it. It was that expensive. Back in the 1960s, there was still a lot of socioeconomic inequalities, and it was just a fact back in the 1960s. No other way to put it. Okay, so whites were the one that were doing powder cocaine, and blacks were doing crack cocaine because crack cocaine was cheaper. No other way to put it. Okay, but you see how this is, the scale is even. Okay, because you have all these people on the right side that are black that are just in prison for 5 grams of of crack cocaine, when it took over 500 grams of powder cocaine to get a prison sentence. Okay, so this is kind of the separate but equal is obviously very sarcastic in this figure here. And if you read it, so a 100-to-1 disparity between powder cocaine possession and crack cocaine. Okay. Bottom line is, if I got caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine, I was going to prison. If I got caught with 5 grams of powder cocaine, I was probably going to get a slap on the wrist. If I was caught with 400 grams of powder cocaine, I was probably going to get a slap on the wrist. Till I hit that 500 grams, I wasn't going to prison. Okay? So that's kind of one of the other ways that, and historical evidence that why blacks are overrepresented, rather, when it comes to crime trends. Okay? So the next one, gender and crime. Gender and crime. So obviously, vast majority of crimes are committed by males, just a fact. There's different hypotheses that are listed below that suggest to explain the different offending patterns between males and females. So the chivalry hypothesis, for example, is that males and females have been treated differently by the criminal justice system, insulating females from future offending. The parenting hypothesis simply says that males and females are raised differently. Okay. Biological hypothesis, male and female brains develop differently, therefore men are more likely to outburst in certain situations leading to crime. If you think back to the age crime curve, it goes from 15 to 24 years of age, and a lot of psychological research has shown and proven that the male brain is not mature until the age of 24, 25, so maybe that's why males commit more crime. Pretty logical to see, right? Let's see here. Gender role is the norms for behavior between males and females lead to higher male crime rates. This kind of gets to that southern subculture of violence and challenging your honor, this, that, and next. If you want to look into the accomplice hypothesis, it's pretty interesting that a lot of times when both male and female are, 50-50 equally as guilty of committing a crime, what happens is throughout the criminal justice process, the female in the situation is kind of looked at as the accomplice who kind of gets the deal or gets away with it because they're going to go ahead and they're going to charge the male. Tons of different ways that gender and crime are vary across males and females. So communities and crime. This is kind of one of the things that I do a lot of research on is rural-urban discrepancies in crime and the differences between rural and urban, the difference between one community and the next, even within the city of Columbia, for example. But all in all, certain types of crime are more likely to occur in certain communities than other. Okay. Research shows that drunk driving is more likely to occur in rural communities. Okay. One of the reasons for that is because public transportation isn't accessible. It's plain and simple. There's no public transportation. If I'm drunk downtown, I can go hop on a bus somewhere and pay to drive home, get driven home, right? But out in the boondocks somewhere, there isn't any transportation, and I'm not walking 12 miles home, so I'm going to drink and drive. One of the other discrepancies is drug production. Drug production is more likely to occur in rural areas. One, because of the smell, you want to be away from cops, it's that and next, while drug consumption and distribution and trafficking is more likely to happen in urban areas, in the cities, because that's where drug users are, that's where the people are, that's where the consumers are. That's kind of what we're getting at, the differences between communities and crime. Okay. Crime and time. All right. Crime trends vary across time. Okay. Vary across time of day of the week, day of the year, and time of the month. Okay. Juvenile crime peaks right after school. Why? Because a lot of children are walking home. A lot of children's parents aren't home yet. It's their time to act up and be stupid, right? Violent crime, it peaks in the summer. Why? Because you have students that are off. You have people that are off. You have a lot of people that are outside because the weather is nice, okay? I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the correlation between ice cream sales and violent crime, right? But both go up. Some people said that it was one of the reasons why violent crime occurred in the summer was because ice cream sales. No, that's your classic example of the difference between correlation and causation, but it holds when it comes to the correlation of it. Both ice cream sales and violent crime rates do go up in the summer, right? Home burglary peaks between 5 and 6 p.m. So if we break this down, burglary, we talked about, is entering a dwelling or a home of some sort and attempting to commit a felony. That is usually stealing and theft, right? It peaks between 5 and 6 p.m. Why? Because that's when people get home from work and that's when it's reported, right? We don't know when between 9 and 5, Joe Smith decided to come and burglarize your house, but the way that the database records it is that it was probably between 5 and 6 p.m. So social class and crime, okay? So obviously different social classes commit different crimes. Different social classes are found guilty of certain crimes at different rates, right? We can get into all of that. We can get into the different crimes, but there are 6 possible reasons that have been cited to explain ties between class and crime. There's stress from poverty, okay? Lower class values, violence leading to lower social class, the inequality breeding of crime, the inequality breeding differential treatment from the justice system, and then methodological limitations. When it comes to methodological limitations, sometimes it's hard to get data on crimes when it comes to upper class, because one, it's not as accessible due to it's not as public because people don't really know about it, and it's not swept under the rug, but it's taken care of a lot quicker than there is for lower level offenses, lower class offenses. And essentially inequality is the perpetuation of crime. People with less power have less resources to hire good lawyers to help them in court and this, that, and next, and to represent them. Okay. If you want to get into this in the next chapter 5, we're going to talk about some theoretical stuff. We'll get into conflict theory and class theories and stuff like that, but this will make more sense later on. Okay. So this is our conclusion. Accurately measuring crime is important. Okay, increased significantly between 1960 and the early 1990s. Know the difference between the NCVS and the UCR. Know the limitations of the UCR. The strategies used to measure and report juvenile offending, crime in the life course, Southern subculture of violence. This is all stuff that we've covered, guys, but it's here so that you can use these as study points to study. This is the conclusion of this chapter 3. Let me know if you have any questions. If you have any questions, please don't forget there is the open discussion forum. Post them on there. Help a classmate out. I'll hop on there every once in a while to answer questions. But if not, that's all I got, and we are good to go for chapter 3.